From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host,
big, daring, creepy, gory, sexy farm guy dad bod,
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 273 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Returning to the show is good friend and author Tim Burdick. We're going to talk a little bit about the Halloween film franchise and the world of Star Wars. But first, Amy has a question.
Fictional character would you like to see get a spin-off?
I love this question, and I gave some time to think about it, and the one that came to mind was a show that we were supposed to get 10, 15 years ago, and that was from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There was supposed to be a spin-off on like BBC of Rupert Giles from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as portrayed by Anthony Stewart Head, and it was going to be called Ripper. And I think Giles was a great character. Anthony Stewart Head was an amazingly charismatic performer. And Buffy and Angel and the other, those Whedon projects were very focused on young, very handsome or attractive, conventionally so, young performers and very athletic, and having a show based on a little bit of an older character who wasn't super strong, it was just sort of Stewart Head, Anthony Stewart Head, good-looking guy, but he wasn't jacked. He was at that point probably in his 40s, maybe 50s, and just sort of looked like a handsome guy. And he would have been able, and it would have been interesting watching him fight these evil creatures and dealing with the monster of the week, and having to do so not because he was the strongest, not because of his amazing martial arts abilities, but just being smarter and better experience. I thought it could have made for some very interesting stories, and I think it would have been great to give Anthony Stewart Head, who has had a very nice career. I know he was not that long ago in the Ted Lasso show, so he's had a great career, but hasn't really been given those lead roles that I think he deserves. All the way from the Czech Republic, returning to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, author and good friend, dear friend, one of the first people that I reached out to when we started this endeavor, Tim Burdick. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Brad. I'm glad to be awake and talking to you and coming to Cosmic Geppetto one more time to talk the good talk.
It's 4 o'clock Eastern Time where I'm at. And what time is it in Prague?
It's 9 o'clock. We did the time change last week, so we're only about 5 hours apart, whereas usually we're 6.
We always look for reasons to talk, and often you'll shoot me a message like, hey, here's 10 things that I think would be really cool to talk about, and I pick my favorites. We're going to just start with one. We're not that far removed from the release of Halloween Ends, which is, I don't know, I think it's like the 11th Halloween movie. Did not get particularly good reviews. It made money, but not the same money that the last two in this series. It was sort of revitalized by bringing back Jamie Lee Curtis, sort of ignoring everything that came before except for the first Halloween movie. You ask, it's like, how come there's so many bad Halloween movies? I have a theory, but I want to hear, like, what your view is of the franchise in general.
I saw the first one, or for the longest time, I had never seen them except for like maybe one of the random ones that came out. And I have to say that when I actually saw the very, very first one, I can see why people went bonkers about it. I mean, when you think about what they did on such a limited budget, what kind of scares they produced, I can see why people really went after wanting to develop that franchise further. But yeah, I mean, people really, really. I didn't get to see the last one, but people seem to really love to hate that last one so much.
It's such a weird franchise where there have been so many reboots and reimaginings, but then it keeps going back to Jamie Lee Curtis. Jamie Lee Curtis starred in the first two, Halloween 2. To give an idea, the first movie came out in 1978 and made $70 million. And that's just an ungodly amount of money for a horror movie in the 70s. I mean, adjusted for inflation, that would be a really impressive blockbuster. They did the sequel, which followed the first one directly. It was like the next night or something, shortly thereafter. Then the third movie, Halloween Season of the Witch, wasn't a Mike Myers movie.
Yeah.
Or Michael Myers. They were sort of went with the idea that, okay, we're going to do Halloween movies where they have nothing to do with Michael Myers. We're just going to have Halloween is sort of like a name brand. And people hated it. Then they did 3 more movies, Halloween 4, 5, and then The Curse of Michael Myers, where Michael Myers was just basically, and I think by that point, he was almost indistinguishable from Jason Voorhees. He was just the unstoppable monster following everybody. And then they had sort of the first reboot, H2O, where they brought Jamie Lee Curtis back.
Saw it, yeah.
Then they ignored everything except for the first 2 movies. People really liked that movie. And then they did another one, Halloween Resurrection, where they immediately killed off Jamie Lee Curtis. And nobody cared. And then Rob Zombie did 2 movies. The first of which was successful, rebooted everything, and then the second of which was pretty easily dismissed. Rob Zombie's been in the news a lot lately because he just directed a Munsters movie. Have you seen anything about this?
No, I have not heard anything about it.
When you have a chance, Tim and listeners, watch the trailer for Rob Zombie's Munsters movie. Rob Zombie is an avowed fan of the TV show. He didn't have a lot of money. He also, I mean, it was definitely sort of low budget. His concept was pretty bad. As Rob Zombie's want to do, he cast his wife, Sherry Moon Zombie, in the movie as Lily. And he's cast her in everything he's done. And she's a really bad actress. So it was a flawed concept. Although he was a fan and a lot of people involved with the movie were fans, from what I've seen and what I've heard, it seems like he's a fan of the visuals, but doesn't seem to have like an understanding of what made Munsters tick. And then he cast his wife, and she's a bad actress. It's been universally panned. Rob Zombie is not a good director, but he has a fandom, and also he goes really far with his with his horror movies. He goes really far. They're actually disturbing movies just because he pushes a lot of limits. And then they did the new Halloween movie in 2018, bringing back Jamie Lee Curtis, ignoring everything that happened before except for the first movie. And Jamie Lee Curtis is awesome, but Then they followed up with Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, each one doing poorer than the one before and less liked than the one before.
I guess the one thing is that, maybe Jamie Lee Curtis gets the love. She was one of the first Scream queens. You've nailed it on the head that she actually is a serious actress, and so she brings some gravitas to it. I mean, just like when, I don't know what his name was, but in the first Halloween movie, there was the guy who played the doctor, and it was like Donald Pleasance or something, if I got his name right at all. Jamie Lee Curtis, you're right. If it was anybody else, Heather Graham or somebody, they just maybe really wouldn't pull it off. And I have to tell you, you go onto Facebook and there's all these groups that basically 364 days out of the year, they're looking forward to Halloween, this holiday. The movies itself, the horror genre, they have hardcore supporters, and this film, if you do it right, can be a fun flick. Or I don't know, maybe people just have too much times on their hands and they need to bitch about something. But I'm gonna go with my theory that Jamie Lee Curtis being the real linchpin.
Some producers, directors, and probably definitely some studios don't understand what makes these movies tick. They wanted to put it in the same section as Jason Voorhees as Freddy Krueger, the Pinhead stuff, where it's about the bad guy, and you can just fill the movies up with young, pretty, inexpensive actors, and it'll all work out fine. The Friday the 13th is just about Jason Voorhees slowly murdering a bunch of teens. With Friday the 13th, it's all about he murders teens who, because they're sexually irresponsible or in some other ways jerks, the movie wants you to feel like they kind of deserve it until Jason Voorhees runs up against someone who is virtuous enough that they don't deserve to die, and they're the ones who eventually causes Jason's undoing. With the Nightmare on Elm Street, it's Freddy Krueger. Not only does he have an interesting look, but he's also the horror character who is sort of quippy and sort of has fun, and you end up weirdly rooting for him. And there's an imagination to the dream, everything happening in the dreams. And Pinhead, it's people who deserve it. Like, they're not good people. They're definitely selling their soul to the devil, and well, that's what you get. But with Mike Myers, he's sort of has a bland look. His motivation's never particularly well established. It's all about the Laurie Strode character, Jamie Lee Curtis's, usually as portrayed by Jamie Lee Curtis. And without that dynamic, without her, it's all about her freaking out. And is she going crazy? Is she seeing what she's seeing? And battling against that, she's who you're rooting for. And without her, without that dynamic of this huge malevolent sort of faceless force against her, there's nothing there.
You really need that sympathetic character, the heroine or the hero who you're just rooting for to get in the car, to escape, or to survive until the police comes. And Jamie Lee Curtis does it very well. And a lot of the films that become really big successes with the horror genre have that particular character where you want to see him make it, or you're kind of curious. There's a whole group of people, you see the Scream films, Neve Campbell's character, and you're always wondering, is Neve going to make it this time, or who amongst this new group of characters is going to survive, and who is the killer and stuff. So well, maybe Scream isn't the best example because it's a little bit different with the unstoppable murderer, but you're right. There's that certain character that everybody's rooting for that definitely gives it its hook more so than other genres.
And I don't think you and I have ever talked about this. Are you a horror fan?
Well, you know what's really funny is that like growing up, when you were talking about the particular Halloween films, I as a kid, never really got to watch those. But what I do remember as a kid, being a 12-year-old, I remember seeing the preview or the trailer to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I cannot get out of my head the image of three kids in silhouette trick-or-treaters running across like an open field or something, or as dusk is falling. I remember that trailer freaking me out quite a bit. Things like John Carpenter's The Thing, I never got to see until maybe like I was in college or something like that. Maybe I don't even know if Terminator, if it's really considered horror, but that was the first thing that ever really scared the crap out of me. But I like the horror genre now. Usually, I either enjoy going back and trying to find the classics in the 70s and 80s film, or I am looking for new stuff in animation, or I'm looking for foreign films. Let the right one in, and these things where they're done in such a different way, where they're, what is it? Less is more. I think, what is it? Eli Roth in the 90s and 2000, horror became, what was the phrase they used? It was gore porn.
Torture porn.
Yeah, it just had to be bloody, and there just had to be a high body count, and if somebody died, they died badly.
Often with an aspect of sexual violence and mutilation. Because, yeah, Eli Roth did the Hostel films. And I never got into that. I never got into the Saw stuff.
No, never.
But if nothing else, also because it was the problem of the escalation. It's like, okay, well, in the first movie, you have people getting their eyes gouged out and mutilated with blowtorches. Like, what are we going to do in the second movie? He's like, no, we're good. No thanks. And we saw all the mousetrap-esque torture devices and ticking clock stuff. And it's like, I got a feeling those movies were more interesting to create the scenarios, but I found them off-putting, and also everyone was just so interchangeable. With Hostel, it was fine, attractive young actors, and especially actresses who were willing to take their clothes off.
Yeah.
With the Saw films, let's find mid-tier TV stars. Let's find Luke from Gilmore Girls. Let's find Donnie Wahlberg before he's on that Blue Bloods and before he starts touring with New Kids on the Block again and he could use a paycheck. Let's get a lot of those sort of, I sort of recognize that guy actors and put them in a film together. You don't get the best performances. Nobody from the Hostel franchise has become a Jamie Lee Curtis. We never say it's like, Jennifer Lawrence, she got her start in Hostel. They don't have somebody who can find that Jamie Lee Curtis, that excellent talent who can raise it above. The first one was John Carpenter directed that. John Carpenter is a very good director who knows how to find hot talent before they become hot talent. And John Carpenter found and made Kurt Russell, who by that point was just sort of a Disney teen actor.
Yeah.
And did The Thing and Escape from New York and really did something special. Even the first Friday the 13th, that had Bonnie Bedelia and Kevin Bacon. The first Nightmare on Elm Street, young Johnny Depp. That raised it a level is like, okay, actually find some up-and-coming talent and do something.
I agree with you. I was thinking about 2 Halloween films, and last summer, under the pandemic, there was, on Netflix, there was Fear Street, and that was a trilogy. That was some good storytelling, because each one of the Fear Streets had had that connecting character where you were sympathetic with them, but it was good storytelling, they were looking at it from, you're right, the first one was maybe the teen slasher flick. The second one, or the third one, was from the perspective of the Salem witch trial vibe to it. Definitely different, and it definitely caught my imagination. But when you talk about horror films with like up and coming talent, there was a horror film that I saw long time ago, Trick or Treat, by Michael Dougherty. And that had like Brian Cox and Dylan Baker and Anna Paquin in it. Nobody's ever seen it, or it's never been like a big thing, but that had 4 interlocking crazy stories in it that was good fun, and I could definitely, if I wasn't worried about my kids walking in on me watching it, I could definitely get in the habit of seeing that. I don't know if I'd watch it every Halloween, but every other.
And I don't watch a lot of horror films. It's never been my genre, often because they're pretty bad.
Oh, definitely.
Horror films, they have a small but very dedicated fan base. So the problem becomes they don't need quality. Looking at the list of Halloween movies, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 of these movies. The first Halloween was very good. The second was okay. So those 2 good movies. 3 was bad, 4 was bad, 5 was bad, 6 was bad. They were just sort of run-of-the-mill bad horror movies that had low budgets and didn't make a lot of money. H2O was good. It brought back Jamie Lee Curtis and had a really good cast as well. You had LL Cool J, who knows how to be LL Cool J, and Michelle Williams. That's an Oscar-winning actress.
Definitely.
And you have Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Josh Hartnett. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt was right at the point where he had become established from Third Rock from the Sun, and we were starting to see maybe there was a little more to him than that as well. And Josh Hartnett, we thought he was going to be a really big star at that point. That's a really good cast. So that's 3 good movies, and then Halloween Resurrection was pretty bad. They kill off Jamie Lee Curtis within the first few minutes of the movie. You have the Rob Zombie stuff, which they ramped up the sexuality and they ramped up the violence, and it was, not very good. And then you have the new Halloween. So really, out of 13 movies, 4 were good. And the other 9 of those films are passable to bad. And the franchise is still going. Can you imagine if you had, take your franchise, the Marvel stuff. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, but if only 25% of the Marvel movies were good, were moneymakers, were successful, we wouldn't be on, like, going on 25, 26 of these movies. But because these movies are made so cheap and they do well in video rentals or streaming or whatever, you're able to continue mining those. But it's like, we can make another one, but we can't make it for $50 million. We're going to have to get some second tier talent, and we're going to have to get a director. The hope is you find a cheap director who's has a lot of cool ideas and wants to make a lot out of it, but they end up just getting sort of journeyman directors who aren't going to put anything into the movie. And that's across the board with all horror franchises. There have been some, most Friday the 13th movies are terrible. And most Freddy Krueger movies, it's Robert Englund doing his darndest with less and less each time. And it makes it a really unreliable genre, and it feels like once every few years somebody does something interesting, like the first of the new Halloweens, or like the good seasons of Walking Dead, which is a horror franchise, but let's turn it into a TV show. Let's ramp up the character work. Let's have it be um high budget for TV, and let's get some really good talent behind it. And then there's definitely the horror aspect, but they were able to do something special. Um, but that's rare. And zombies is the subgenre of horror that they seem to be able to do something with, because you can do zombies really cheap. If you watch the first night of the Living Dead, that was great and it was so cheap. But you can do zombies really cheap because you don't need wild effects or anything. You just need extras who sort of walk slow, and then you got a movie. Well, if do you have a favorite horror subgenre, like vampires or zombies or what have you?
What always surprises me is probably I like watching the vampires a little bit more. Vampires are ghost stories because I saw what was it? I saw Vampires versus the Bronx recently on Netflix. I at least liked the idea. I liked how they tried to reinvent the genre and they tried to reinvent it with something new. And they added a few twists to keep it nice and simple. That's what I like. But zombies, unless it's the originals, then no. I mean, yes, I'd like to see what Zack Snyder has done, but usually the story is very disappointing, or I don't know, I get really turned off. And actually, for some reason, I find actually zombie novels to actually be a better read, or at least much better than I expect them to be, because I just expect it to be somebody just groaning and limping along or something. And instead, when I get a good zombie book, then I'm actually like, oh, damn, phew, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Did you read World War Z?
Yeah. I read that in the handbook probably every year if I can. I want to be ready.
No, the people who haven't had chance, World War Z was so much better than the movie. So good.
Max Brooks, that particular book is just awesome, and I love to read it every year. I can read it every year. There's just one or two characters that it's just a little too rough, and maybe I have to skip it now after the first 2 to 3 times. But yeah, that was such a disappointing film. I mean, it had some good moments. Don't get me wrong. We love Brad Pitt, but compared to what has been done,
Having the slow moving zombies was so important to the book. It helped you understand why zombies are so scary, is because they don't care. They just are going to slowly come after you. They're not trying to be clever. They're not trying to hide. They're not trying anything. There's no motivation. They don't care if you're a good guy, bad guy, man, woman, or child. They're just coming for you. And you can kill 1,000, but the 1,001, the number 1,001 is going to get you, because they're not going to retreat. That was so compelling. And then in the movie, you have Brad Pitt sort of doing action hero stuff, and you had running zombies. And I was like, okay, this has nothing to do with the book. They just like the name.
yeah, I mean, also they tried to create some hook where it was like they tried to make it like some biohazard thing, or if any virus really da 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 da, and they tried to make it scientific and throwing out this pseudoscience to it. And yeah, no, I didn't like that at all. Totally killed it.
Did you have you said you liked the vampire stuff. Do you have a favorite vampire film?
I think the Bram Stoker's with what is it? Oh my gosh.
Gary Oldman?
Yeah, Gary Oldman. He is the gold standard. Him and Winona Ryder. I truly believe those two fall in love. I feel so bad for Keanu that he gets pushed to the side, but fact of the matter is that's the gold standard when it comes to Dracula films. I have seen like a Swedish vampire film that's kind of like a not an old school one, but it's like set in like the 60s or 70s. and it has kid vampires. And that's creepy as hell because there's so much that they don't really show. It's more about alluding to things. And that's scary, but when we're talking about vampires, Gary Oldman, hands down, he does it.
I remember when that came out in '92. It was bloody. It was creepy. Francis Ford Coppola directed that. I think that was sort of the last big movie that Coppola, big successful movie that Coppola had, because he did that. Then he did Jack, which was sort of a hit, a swing and a miss movie with Robin Williams. He did The Rainmaker, the movie that put Matt Damon on the map, but really felt like Coppola had to pay a bill. Then Coppola hasn't done a major movie since then. So it was like this last big, daring, creepy, gory, sexy vampire movie. Not really a movie you would see today as a film. That was really cool. I don't feel like there hasn't been a really big Dracula project since then. Nobody can really top that. So there certainly have been there was like a TV Dracula show that lasted a season. Dracula will be a bad guy, or there'll be a bad movie here or there. But like nobody wants to touch that IP ever since.
Yeah, no, I remember there was a series of books that like Charlene Harris did and Anna Paquin was in.
True Blood.
True Blood, thank you. And that was kind of sexy southern goth vampire whatever, and I saw the first season and I loved the first book, but maybe that's the only other thing. I think they tried to redo Interview with a Vampire again.
Yeah, that's out now. That's like was it AMC produced that show? It's coming out, and that came out right around the time that Better Call Saul ended. I think they were hoping that was going to be their next buzzy TV show, and it has not. I don't know. I don't even know if it's supposed to be good or not. It's just sort of there. Anne Rice stuff in general is weird. I think it exists better. Her work exists better as books.
Yeah.
They're very long, very thick. Not just like the actual thickness of the books, but just she puts so much backstory and everything else in there where I guess it would work better as a TV show than as a movie, but she's not big on action. They're not action-packed novels. Looking at the cast right now, it's when your big name is Eric Bajosian, there's no big names and nobody is really popping out as, I don't know who this person is, but I need to see them and stuff. So it just never, it didn't connect. I think there's also like a Mayfair Witches, which was Anne Rice's other big franchise, was the Mayfair Witches. I think there's a Mayfair Witches show that nobody cares about.
That sounds familiar, but you're right. I've maybe heard about it, and yeah, totally have not seen it.
I think everybody who likes to read goes through an Anne Rice phase. And the thing with Anne Rice is it's horror. She writes horror, but she writes horror. She writes book horror, where it's a lot of psychological stuff and a lot of build. And that doesn't necessarily translate well to film or other media. I can only speak from my own perspective, but I think everybody who likes Anne Rice reads Anne Rice for 5 years and they get into it and then they're like, oh, these books aren't actually that good. There's just not enough meat on the bone and once you read Interview with a Vampire, Vampire Lestat, the first of the Mayfair Witches, then you're like, okay, I think I got this. With Anne Rice, there would be a frustration where she would do course correction in her books, where her first book of the Vampire Chronicles was Interview with a Vampire. Lestat became the most popular character from that book. So the second book she did, The Vampire Lestat, sort of undid a lot of the stuff we understood about the character from the first book. Because, he's the bad guy, but everyone likes him the most. so I'm going to make him more of a good guy. And it turns out stuff that Louis said about Lestat, we're just going to ignore that stuff. So all of a sudden, everyone becomes an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, with the Anne Rice stuff, actually, the person we've really ignored in this kind of podcast is Stephen King, and Stephen King stuff getting translated into horror. And so, probably, when you go through the Stephen King pantheon of books, you're like, well, who else is out there that has some street cred? And maybe you're right. Anne Rice would have been the only one that maybe at the time would have held a candle. But with the Stephen King stuff, you can still go back to it. And the Anne Rice stuff, you're just like, yeah, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and then that's it. Whereas Stephen King is still cranking out stuff that's freaking people out, and they're still having debates about whether this adaptation of this book and that is all that, and who's gonna direct his next book.
Stephen King was so weird because I remember the 80s and early 90s where every year there was a Stephen King property turned into a movie, and they were almost all bad.
Oh yeah. Oh.
What was the one he directed himself? Maximum Overdrive, which was so bad, and he directed it himself. And I remember, and this is how big a deal Stephen King was at the peak, and he's still a huge deal. He's still one of the most popular writers in the world, but there had been X amount of movies based on Stephen King, and he got a chance because of how big a pop cultural icon he was. He got a chance to direct his own movie. For the trailer for the movie, it wasn't scenes from the film or anything else. It was Stephen King talking directly to the audience. And he's like, everyone else has directed these movies, but I want to do it myself because I know what to do. They would be interspersed with, oh, there's a tractor trailer running over a building or whatever. And then the last line is him pointing at the camera. He's like, I'm going to scare the hell out of you. Apparently, he was coked out of his mind the entire time he did this movie, and Stephen King does not remember doing it. Can you imagine if the biggest writer currently, or within the last 10 years, J.K. Rowling, if J.K. Rowling, she has so much, she had a lot of approval on what they did with her work. But if she says, like, no, I'm going to direct Order of the Phoenix, that's how weird an idea that it was. Hey, did you like the new music in this episode? You can thank Logan Mendenhall for that. There's more to come. His work seems to translate. Now, I know we're just coming off of the It movies, which did pretty well. But before that, it seemed like his work translated a little better. They would do the major mini-series, because when we were in college is when they did the Stand. And I just remember that being a huge deal. And everyone, I remember me and friends getting together and watching episodes of The Stand because of how big a deal that was. And that seemed to be... It gave his work a little more room to breathe. His work didn't necessarily have to be gross or gory to still work.
No, you're right. I mean, right now, I don't know if I could, after just coming through the pandemic, I don't know if I could read The Stand right now. Or having kids of my own, I don't know if I could read it right now. But there's definitely, I remember reading, Dr. Sleep and some other stuff where I was just like, oh, and Insomnia and those things, and Tommyknockers. I guess some of the stuff there was The Green Mile with Tom Hanks, and I guess maybe Frank Drabant. I remember you were a big fan of like Shawshank Redemption and The Mist, and those are maybe for me the gold standard, because maybe that was a director who really got it. he could respect the spirit of it, and those were some awesome films.
It's sort of funny. What was it? Dolores Claiborne was another film based on his work, where the best adaptations of King's work to film aren't the horror stuff.
Yeah, no.
Shawshank was a prison drama. Green Mile was a prison drama with a little bit of supernatural. Dolores Claiborne was a gothic family drama. The It movies would be the best horror films. Everything else was sort of crappy and cheap, and they'd be popular, but often they had so little to do with the original content because they had to pare everything down. So Pet Cemetery, I mean, people liked Pet Cemetery, Firestarter. I mean, they were all movies that did well, but they were also sort of low budget. And Carrie was brilliant, but that was another case of they got an amazing actress to play the role and a really good director. It's like, oh, okay, if you get brilliant directors and a Oscar caliber actress, it might work.
Carrie is like, you're right. That's probably one of the earlier films that he did. That you're right. There's Firestarter with the young Drew Barrymore and George C. Scott, and maybe people might just watch it out of curiosity. But Carrie, that's something that people. John Travolta as well in that. So that was a who's who of upcoming talent and stuff like that. But yeah, Carrie, ooh, that's the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah, young John Travolta, like before everything got weird with him. And this we've sort of, as often happens, we've gone into a different direction than we were intended. We were just supposed to talk about Halloween movies. Streaming services has sort of changed the game.
Oh, definitely.
A lot of horror stuff, a lot of scary stuff will go right to streaming, which works well because a lot of horror, you would sort of miss it in theaters, but you would find it on late night TV or on cable or on VHS. I mean, I remember seeing the first Swamp Thing, and that was, I went to, like, one kid had a bunch of friends over for an overnight party, and we watched Swamp Thing. And it's like, okay, I get it. So many people, their first memory of seeing the first Freddy movie or Friday the 13th was there was a slumber party and we got scary movies. And streaming seems to like narrow that down, take it directly to there. We already talked about the success of The Walking Dead, where there's like 4 Walking Dead shows on at any time. These are definitely horror TV shows, and it does so well on that format. Do you see there being another big hit in horror via like a streaming service?
There's one person, I guess it's Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, and his stuff has been translated into 1 or 2 films with Horns and Daniel Radcliffe. And I think on the streaming services right now, they have Lock and Key, which was an incredible graphic novel. I don't know, I can't bring myself to watch it so much because I've seen how they've had to adapt it to make it more visual or to make it fit, and it just loses that bite. But I would say that I definitely would be keeping my eyes out for somebody who actually knows how to respect Joe Hill's material and can really see the spirit of what he's doing. Because, like, I read a graphic novel by him this summer where it was like 3 heads in a bag. And it was such a simple idea, but it had some good hooks to it, and I don't want to ruin it for anybody. But that right there, if they were to try to reinvent HBO's, what was it? HBO in the old days had a Creep Show, like a Twilight Zone thing.
Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, Tales of the Crypt. So I always feel like M. Shyamalan Night, a lot of his ideas are a good idea, and then they just don't work for 90 minutes. But I feel like M. Shyamalan Night was put on this earth to actually have a really good series. Maybe he could connect with Joe Hill, or if he ever decided to do somebody else's work besides his own. Joe Hill, I feel like, is cranking out the type of material that people would really lap up and really get into. If M. Shyamalan Knight ever did somebody else besides his own stuff, that could be something that could be really exciting and really new for like a streaming service. And everybody and everybody's brother is trying to come up with the next big thing or to pull in the subscribers. That could be pretty special, but we'll see.
Tim, the other thing you wanted to talk about is we're in a pretty interesting era for Star Wars fandom. We're pretty far removed from the last Star Wars film. I'm trying to think when The Rise of Skywalker came out. 2019. So we are 3 years removed from Rise of Skywalker. We are definitely years removed from the next one. It's going to be, they keep saying there's going to be more Star Wars films, but nothing is in the works. But there's a whole lot of streaming content. Disney Plus, it's all Marvel shows and Star Wars shows.
Basically.
What are your thoughts on that? I thought of the sequel trilogy, I thought The Force Awakens was good. I thought The Last Jedi would have been great. I don't know, great, but it would have been good if it hadn't been the main movie. I think it would have been interesting because that was the point where they were sort of doing these Star Wars saga films, like Rogue One. Like if it would have been more of a side story and instead of being the main narrative. And I thought The Rise of Skywalker, I thought that was nonsense and it didn't really work for me. Had individual scenes that I thought were good, but the storytelling was just so bad. It's tough though. For me, Star Wars is such a big franchise. It does feel like there needs to be something on the big screen for Star Wars.
I would agree and disagree with you on some extent because you're right. The last trilogy, when I saw it, I saw the first film as, The Force Awakens, the passing of the old guard to the new guard. I like certain characters in it. I like certain moments. I could see who was bringing it. But then I was talking to a friend and he's like, yeah, I've already seen that film and it's called the original Star Wars. And then when I watched it again, I was like, he's right. They basically just took blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then they just put a new title to it. And at least with The Last Jedi, I know people really hated it, but with The Last Jedi, I felt like that one at least there was some new storytelling to it. And I was like, right, I haven't seen this film before. I haven't seen it in any of the other stuff. And this feels like something new. And I got it and I liked it. And then you're right. The Force Awakens, it has some nice moments. I'd love to put some paintings up in my apartment of it. But some of the storytelling literally makes me want to pick my TV set up and throw it out the window. It just makes me want to scream on how bad it is. I mean, Rogue One as a standalone film worked, and it definitely, as what was it, kind of compared to a Dirty Dozen kind of storytelling. That was definitely something new, and the characters were not Jedis. It went in a different perspective, and I could probably watch that every Christmas. I'm sorry, I'll have to say it. I know it's not a Christmas film, but I could watch it every year. Then, what was it, the Han Solo film? Just basically torpedoed whatever. People just hated it.
It was a bad idea. Nobody cared. Nobody had been wondering how Han first met Chewie. Nobody had wondered how he got the Millennium Falcon. Nobody wondered how he got the name Solo. They changed directors partway through. I think you had, what was it, with Lord and Miller, you had young, interesting directors who were very good at tweaking genres and tweaking conventions. Then you switch that with Ron Howard, who is a very good director, but but he's also a very safe director. If you're going to go with young, hot, groundbreaking directors like Lord Miller, then you have to go that way. If you're going to go with a guy who's going to tell sort of a safe, fun story and nobody gets hurt, then you go with Ron Howard. But you can't change direction that drastically partway through. I think you end up with something that doesn't satisfy anybody. Listen, if we learned anything from the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, it's so hard to replace or have somebody step in for Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
They did it pretty successfully in the third Indiana Jones movie with River Phoenix. But River Phoenix was a generational talent. And you also still got Harrison Ford. The poor guy who was cast in that, and a perfectly fine actor, but you're not going to fill those shoes. And he wasn't playing Han Solo as a 12-year-old. He's playing young adult Han Solo. We've seen young adult Han Solo, and that's 20-something Harrison Ford. Nobody wants that comparison.
So, yeah, the Han Solo film really woke up the studio to the fact that, hey, people are just not going to want to, when they go see Star Wars, they want an event. It is a cultural, reckoning. It's a part of U.S. culture. It's a part of global culture now. So when they go to the cinemas, they want something big. And the Han Solo film just showed them that they just can't march out any product anymore. And the series has been their chance to take some of the products, because I know when the Han Solo film came out, then they were like, oh, well, there'll be a Boba Fett film, and there'll be an Obi-Wan Kenobi film, and then when Han Solo just crashed and burned, then they were like, no, there won't. It's an interesting debate we can have, whether you think the Boba Fett series would have made a good film, or the Obi-Wan series, seeing Ewan McGregor do it again, if these would have made good event pictures. I have a friend who just went crazy how much he hated the Obi-Wan, and he was like, well, the only reason why they made that was so they could sell more Legos. But what's your take?
I don't think Boba Fett would have made a good movie, especially not the Boba Fett we saw, because you're not making... It would have been a $200 million movie. You're not making that movie with basically a nobody as the star. What was the name of the guy who played Boba?
I can't pronounce it because he's a big New Zealand actor, actually. But I know you're right. I know he's not a Tom Cruise.
He's a little bit of an older guy, farm guy, dad bod. He wasn't buff. He didn't look great with his shirt off, but he did look like a guy who could take a punch. So he's very believable. You're not going to do that movie with dad bod. You're going to put him on the Chris Hemsworth diet, and it's going to be a guy with a thick head of hair and a great chin, and you're going to put him in that movie if it's a film. With the TV show, they did a slow burn. That said, it did feel like they sort of didn't feel all in with the show with Boba Fett, because an episode and a half of it was all Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I love Mandalorian, but it shouldn't be his show.
All I can say with the Boba Fett thing is that there was one half of it was like a backstory. That was some great storytelling, and that I could just sit there, and somebody was like, I could just watch Boba Fett ride his Tusken Raider animal across the desert forever. And there was that part of the series that definitely hooked me. But you're right, the other part where it's Boba Fett trying to establish himself as a crime lord, that story just died. And you're right, in fact, that one part of those episodes was totally The Mandalorian did not help.
It just interrupted the storytelling. It made you remember that Mando and Grogu were sort of more compelling characters, especially in the present. A lot of it was everyone wanted to see how Boba Fett survived, because, man, he was really, really dead at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Oh, yeah.
all right, how did he escape this and tell that story? So then once they told that story, it's like, this sort of feels like everything else is just more. It's just some more stuff on top of it. But I liked it and I watched it. I really enjoy Mandalorian. It is interesting where Mando in the second season showed his face a lot more than in the first movie. In the first season, they had one chance to show Mando's face, and they sort of got around it because it was a droid and he could show his face to a droid. In the second season, he shows it again. I was like, I think I could have done without, if you were going to show his face, I think doing it once in the first, like have it a once a season thing, it sort of felt like, hey, we have a charismatic actor who's getting a lot of buzz. It's like, why are we casting this guy? Why do we have Pedro Pascal in the show if we're not going to show his face? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't love that. That's personal taste. Grogu is still a great character and has really grasped onto people. I'm excited for the third season. They've also created some pretty interesting characters for spinoffs. I'm an avowed Timothy Olyphant fan who has been in both a pretty interesting character in an episode of Boba Fett and an episode of Mandalorian. Give him a show. I always believe that you should give Timothy Olyphant a show, especially anything Western adjacent, because he's made for those sort of roles. And the other Mandalorians that we've seen, it's like, yeah, just these are some good characters. How did you like Obi-Wan, and how did you like Andor, which we haven't even talked about yet?
I have to say that with Obi-Wan, there's parts of it that feel like something really special. They got Ewan McGregor to come back. There's certain elements to it where I'm like, this is a great nod. The fans will love this, or this is a real big help, or this is really interesting. But those weren't the elements that were the main impetus or the main thing that kept the story going. They were just little side or fun facts. The big storytelling about, oh, he's afraid of Darth Vader, or oh, he doesn't want to face Darth Vader again. That was cool a little bit, but at the same time, when you thought about it, you're like, wow, that is just weak ass. It just didn't really make sense, or when you thought about it and when you put the dots together, then it just didn't really go. Whereas when I heard that they were going to make Andor, I was very upset because I love Rogue One and I didn't like the idea at all. I was totally against it. I was like, I love these characters. I love it's a one-off. I love everything about how this film came into be. And when they said they were going to make the series, I was like, oh, no, kill me now. But at the same time, I've been watching the series. It's completely different. It's finally broken its mold of like a 3-episode arc. At first, I was like, it would be faster to watch paint dry than this. But at the same time, I'm really excited because, I was like, we never really did get the full story on how the Resistance is created. You're right, the Star Wars franchises has all the different genres. George Lucas, kid at heart, and so a lot of these Star Wars films and a lot of these other animated series is for the kid in us. This Andor series, this is not for the kid in us. This is for the adult in us. This is like watching the French Resistance get started. I watched some of the episodes where the character Cassian, Diego Luna's character, is in prison, and I was like, man, this is hard to watch. Another prison film. But I got a vibe that things are going to change or pick up speed, and when they do change and they do pick up speed, then it's a good ride. But I can understand why it might not be everybody's flavor, but at the same time, I'm really respecting and really enjoying how it is something new, something different, and they got the right people for the project.
With Mandalorian, they got what's his name? The guy who directed the first two Iron Man movies.
Jon Favreau.
So they got Jon Favreau. Was a great choice for that and did a great job. J. Abrams, who was a massive Star Wars fan, directing the first and third of the new films, obviously with mixed results, but he definitely was a fan. That's sort of an interesting thing where Disney has shown interest in, all right, let's get top tier creators and hand them the keys to the kingdom a bit and see what happens. Two of the projects that they've talked about was Patty Jenkins, who did the Wonder Woman films. Her getting, what was it, Rogue One Squadron or something along those lines. I think that fell apart, but that was an interesting idea, although Patty Jenkins, the first Wonder Woman film really connected with people. The second one, not so much. They've talked about Taika Waititi getting his own Star Wars trilogy. And man, if you had asked me about that before Thor Love and Thunder came out, I would have been all aboard. I really like Taika Waititi. I still like Taika Waititi, and I liked Love and Thunder more than some people have. But I'm starting to think that Taika Waititi is a little overburdened, and it might be time to scale back instead of giving him such a huge project, especially if the idea is him being the creative force behind 3 movies.
Yeah, he's going to need help. He's going to need some good ideas, good writing talent, which is what I think the Mandalorian has definitely had, and I definitely feel that Andor has had. It has to have that idea. And I agree with you. I didn't get to see Thor Love and Thunder yet. I'm still working my way through the Marvel stuff. But Taika Waititi, definitely, when he gets his hooks into the right project, I think he could definitely do something cool.
And I've talked about this a little bit before, where Taika Waititi is, and I get it, he broke through with, he was a guy who had done a lot of work and with some success, and he had the What We Do in the Shadows, which was a well-liked sort of culty movie. And then he breaks through with Thor Ragnarok, and everyone loved Ragnarok, including me. It's one of my 2 favorite Marvel films. And then he had a chance to do Jojo Rabbit, which was excellent. So and Oscar nominated. And all of a sudden, Taika Waititi gets the thing that I think every director in Hollywood wants. He gets a blank check where he can do whatever movie he wants and whatever TV show. So he ends up creating and producing several TV shows. He brings What We Do in the Shadows and makes a TV show out of that, which he's involved with. He has the pirate show that's on cable. He's voiced characters and acted in a bunch of movies. Directs another big budget Marvel film. With Love and Thunder, what I would say is it seemed like the shackles were off a bit, and maybe they should have been on still. Where everything that I liked from Ragnarok, he did a little too much in Love and Thunder. Instead of one joke, there'd be 3 jokes, all piled on top of each other, and it hurt the effectiveness of it. Sometimes it's a good idea to take a break or power down a little bit and really be fresh and have all your focus on it. And Star Wars is such a big franchise with so much money and everything, and it's got to be exhausting. It's like, okay. It's not like I think it's going to be bad. I just wonder if he can really hit the home run on that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope my fears are unfounded, and I'll definitely go and see them because I like him so much. But I do wonder.
Whoever does the next Star Wars film, I'll always be looking at what kind of track record they had, what they've done in the past. Is it really worth my time to go to the cinemas and see them on the big screen? Now, Star Wars deserves the big screen, but I can't say that I'm suffering too badly by getting to see Obi, Boba Fett, Mandalorian on my TV screen. Because, when the Star Wars movies came out, the first trilogy happened, but, the thing that I never really jumped on, but other people did, was there's all these books, and there's all these comic books about Star Wars, and there's all these games as well. Sorry, I don't have the allowance money for that back in the day. but I've never enjoyed Star Wars in all those different facets like some people might have. And so with the Star Wars series right now, it's in the series mode. And maybe some of these thinking about Mandalorian, and Mandalorian as the way it's being told as like some sci-fi western, it really works as a series. And Andor, it really works as a series. These as films, I think people would just, I think Andor, if it was like a film, I think people would walk out. Boba Fett and Obi, okay, there's debate on whether or not those would be quality projects. Maybe Obi in somebody in the right hands could have been a decent movie, but you're right. With the next project, they're definitely going to remember what has happened and what the fans do and think about it. Now with the series, I don't know. I don't know if people in the States are still worried about the next wave of COVID or what the next pandemic is going to do to the movie going audience. And they're just going to flip a coin and say, right, this has got to be a series. We're not going to risk it. I don't know if that's going to be the new factor.
What is the world of COVID like in the Czech Republic? I feel in the States, we have gotten back to as close to normal as we're going to get. Like, COVID's just going to be part of life any longer.
I would say that's about the same for us, because like I spent my first year at my teaching job where I was doing it all online. And I was basically coming into an empty building. It just freaked me out because I was all alone in my office, teaching a whole bunch of different students online, doing that for about a year. And then the next year, when I actually got to meet the students, it freaked me out even more because I was like, oh my God, your head really isn't that big and you're actually a normal size. And now everything's normal. There's certain people who are at risk and they're walking around with masks, but there's really no restrictions now. And they just encourage people. They encourage people to get vaccinated, but there's not the push that there was before. And there is a certain amount of free testing you can do. So you're right. Now I give my students a lot of leeway. If somebody's like, well, I'm feeling sick, and I'm like, stay home. I don't want you here. I don't want you to infect all of us. It's a part of our culture. Now it's more about the Ukrainian war, what's going to happen with the gas. Everybody's trying to save money and cutting back on the heat. I'm going to be doing testing in January, and I have to do it in certain buildings because they've turned off the heat in other parts of the building. The Ukrainian war is kind of more the bigger concern right now, but people are worried that with COVID and flu, those two together might cause some big issues. But I have to say right now, people are very health conscious, and I've got my masks. And when we were in Thailand this summer, we were on an island that had been shut for 2 years. And basically everywhere you went, people were still in masks, even though you didn't need it being outside. So here in the Czech Republic, you're right. I'd say we're pretty much back to normal, but the people who are at risk, they still wear masks on public transport, and probably in another couple weeks I might start doing it the same, but it's pretty much back to. But I've been to some concerts. They weren't sold out shows, but it felt really good to be back at a show.
What concerts have you been to?
I got to see Seguro Ross at the beginning, and that was a big stadium show. And then I went to see a New Zealand singer, Princess Chelsea, and that was a much smaller, intimate show, but that totally rocked. Seguro Ross, I love, and they did an awesome over 2 hour show. But Princess Chelsea, I didn't have so much of her stuff, and I was just totally shocked at the energy that she brought, and hearing some of the stuff live totally blew me away. It was like 4 or 5 Kiwis on the stage just having a great time, and there just happened to be an audience there.
Not that long ago, I was able to see Ben Folds in concert for the first time in a long while. And that was great. And it was just him and a piano, which is a fun way to see him. I've been real lucky. I've seen Ben Folds so many times, and I've seen him by himself. I've seen him with the Ben Folds Five. I've seen him with other musicians. I've seen him with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and I've seen him with the chamber orchestra. He's such an excellent musician that he does something different and brings something new to the table each time. So yeah, that show had been postponed for like 1 or 2 years. I got tickets to it and they postponed it. I think twice because of COVID. Pretty stoked, and he's still amazing. It's not the last time I'll see him. I'm sort of in an interesting place where I don't go to a lot of concerts anymore. There aren't that many, and you can see people are recovering. I would really like to sort of hit that again. I would sort of like to see, not that long ago, Paul McCartney did a stadium show at the Orioles Park in Camden Yards, Baltimore. And I was like, boy, it'd be sort of neat to see some of these iconic performers who are all in their 70s, some in their 80s, and get a chance to see them one more time before they retire or for whatever other reason might stop performing. The Stones, it would be cool to see the Stones or the Who, Bruce Springsteen, and just get a chance to say, it's like, I saw that person live. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I mean, I'll always want to see Matthew Sweet and Ben Folds and some other performers that I've been fans of, and I've seen so many times. I've seen Marshall Crenshaw probably close to 10 times. You only have iconic performers for so long.
Yeah, I would love to see Arlo Guthrie. I listen to Alice's Restaurant all the time. So Arlo Guthrie, I think, would be really cool to see in that setting.
Tim, as always, this has been amazing. Plug your pluggables. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, I'll probably be doing a blog, on timburdick.com. And if anybody knows of a publisher for a small children's book, drop me a line. And also, I'm doing a blog on one of our old Lockhaven professors, Professor Maddox. If you check out my blog in the next week or so, you'll be hearing about her and what she's puts out a crazy amount of stuff, and she's always appearing in reading. So for those of you that need to feed the soul with poetry, I have the remedy.
Very cool. We recommend everyone check it out. Tim, as always, this has been awesome, and we're going to do this again.
Definitely.
That wraps episode 273. Big thanks to Tim. Such a good guy, such a good friend. It's always great to talk with him. Also, big thanks to Amy. She's very cool. I love her so much, and she asks really, really good questions. Next time on the Cosmic Geppetto podcast, it is the final episode of 2022. So, of course, Honey Badger and her amazing friends make their return. Till then, in the words of Jarve Harden,
see you in the funny pages.
And Merry Christmas.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at Cosmic G-Pod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
And there just had to be a high body count, and if somebody died, they died badly.